A specific Tuesday in March when everything I had built nearly came undone. Not because of a stranger, not because of a competitor, but because my own father walked through my front door and didn't even recognize me. Let me back up. I was 23 when my parents sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I needed to leave. Not suggested, not hinted. Sat me down with a cup of coffee I hadn't asked for. Like the coffee was supposed to soften what was coming, and told me the house was being refinanced and there wasn't room for me anymore. Financially or otherwise. My father said it. My mother sat beside him and looked at her hands. What I didn't know until 3 days later, when I was already sleeping on my college friend's couch, was that my father had drained the savings account my grandmother left me. $11,000. The one she set up when I was 7 and added to every birthday and Christmas until she died. He'd used it as part of the down payment on a new investment property. One he was buying with my uncle, his brother, who had never once remembered my name correctly in 23 years. He didn't tell me. He didn't ask. He didn't leave a note or send a text or explain it at the kitchen table when he handed me that coffee I hadn't wanted. I found out because I called the bank to check my balance before buying a bus pass, and the balance was $42. I stood outside the CVS on Meridian Street with my phone in my hand, and I couldn't move for probably 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because my friend texted me asking where I was, and I had to look up to figure out where I was. I called my father. He picked up on the second ring, which almost surprised me more than anything. He said he had intended to pay it back. He said the investment was going to return triple within 18 months. He said Grandma would have wanted the family to use the money for something meaningful. He said a lot of things, and none of them were an apology. And when I started crying on the corner of Meridian and 38th, he told me I was being dramatic. I hung up. I didn't call back. That was the last real conversation I had with my father for 7 years. I want to be honest about those 7 years, because I think people sometimes imagine that stories like this are clean, that the person who got wronged goes off and silently becomes successful, and never once sits in a parking lot at 2 in the morning wondering what was wrong with them. I did that. I did that more times than I will ever admit out loud. I moved into a studio apartment that cost me more than I could reasonably afford because I needed 4 walls that were mine. I worked at a marketing agency doing data entry and social media scheduling for clients I found tedious and brands I didn't believe in. I got promoted twice in 3 years because I was meticulous, and I showed up early, and I never once called in sick even when I had a fever, because I was terrified of what would happen if I stopped moving. On weekends, I was doing something my coworker had mentioned almost as a joke. She'd said, "You should just start a consulting business. You basically run this place anyway." And I had laughed it off, and then gone home and thought about it for 6 hours straight. I started taking on freelance clients in the evenings, small businesses that needed someone to manage their online presence, clean up their branding, get their Google profiles in order. I charged too little at first. Then I charged what I was worth. Then I charged what the work actually demanded, which was more. By year 3, I had left the agency. By year 5, I had a team of 4 people working out of a rented office space in Fountain Square. By year 6, my firm had managed campaigns for 2 regional hospital systems, a mid-size law firm, and a restaurant group with locations in 3 cities. I won't pretend the restaurant group wasn't part of why what happened next felt so specifically strange. The office building we eventually moved into, a renovated brick building on the near north side, 3 floors, good light, original hardwood. I had purchased through a commercial real estate investment I'd made with 2 partners when I was 28. It wasn't glamorous. We bought it underpriced because the previous owner had let it deteriorate and the commercial tenants had mostly left. We spent 14 months renovating it. I nearly ran out of money twice. I had one very bad November where I was not sure the whole thing was going to survive. But it did. The ground floor had 4 commercial units. We leased them out. My firm occupied half of the second floor. The third floor was event space we rented quarterly. One of the ground floor units became a restaurant. Italian, mid-range, good reviews on Yelp within 6 months of opening. The tenant, I'll call him the chef, because that's mostly what he was, leased from us and ran a tight operation. I didn't eat there regularly. I was a landlord, not a diner. I tried the food twice during the opening month, left a review, and mostly interacted with the chef through our property manager. That changed on a Tuesday in March when my property manager called me at 11:15 in the morning and said, "There's a situation downstairs. I think you should come down." She had never said that before. She was not a dramatic person. I put on my jacket. The restaurant was open for lunch service. Maybe 12 tables occupied, soft jazz, the smell of garlic bread, everything exactly as it should have been, except in the back corner booth, which we reserve for larger parties. There was a group of 4 people who were apparently making the waitstaff miserable. I stood near the host stand and watched for a moment before anyone noticed me. The man doing most of the talking was older, maybe late 50s, well dressed in the way that people who want to look successful dress when they are not quite as successful as they want to appear. The kind of suit that's one size too fitted. He was gesturing widely while speaking to a young server who was standing very still with the particular stillness of someone who is paid to not respond to what they actually want to say. Beside him was a woman I assumed was his wife. She was looking at the menu with the expression of someone who had already decided nothing on it was quite right. Across from them, a younger couple. A woman about my age and a man who kept leaning back in his chair and looking around the restaurant like he was appraising it. I recognized them. I want to tell you there was a dramatic internal moment. There wasn't. It was more like when your body understands something before your brain does. A physical stillness that moves through you from the feet up. I recognized my father. I recognized my mother. I recognized my younger sister who I had not spoken to in 7 years, and I recognized the man beside her who I had never met but who was apparently now her husband. My father was talking about the lighting. He was telling the server, this poor patient server, who looked like she was probably working a double, that the lighting was oppressive, and that he had specifically requested something more ambient when he made the reservation, and that this was not the kind of experience he expected from a restaurant in this building. He used the words, "this building," the way people say, "this establishment," when they want you to know they could be somewhere better. I stood there for another 30 seconds, then I walked over. I want to describe the moment my father looked up and saw me, because I've replayed it probably 500 times and I still can't fully explain what was in his face. It wasn't guilt exactly. It wasn't the crash of recognition I had imagined. The times I had imagined it. It was more like recalibration. His brain catching up to his eyes. The slow assembly of a fact he had filed somewhere he wasn't expecting to open. "Hi, Dad," I said. My mother made a sound I can't describe. My sister looked at her husband. Her husband looked at me with the careful neutrality of a person who has been briefed. My father said my name. He said it quietly, almost like a question. I pulled a chair from the nearest empty table and sat down at the end of their booth without being invited. The server looked at me. I looked at her and said, "Could you give us a few minutes? I'm so sorry for the trouble." She nodded and left with an expression I recognized as relief. "I didn't know you'd be here," my father said. "I'm here most Tuesdays," I said. "I work upstairs." He looked at the ceiling briefly. "You work in this building?" "I own this building," I said. "My partners and I purchased it in 2019. We finished renovations in 2021. The restaurant you're having lunch in is a tenant of ours." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a table where 4 people are trying to decide what their face is supposed to be doing. My mother said my name softly, almost an exhale. My father cleared his throat. He smoothed the front of his jacket, which didn't need smoothing, and then, because he was my father and this was consistent with everything I had known about him for 30 years, he pivoted. "That's impressive," he said. The word impressive landed the way a compliment lands when it is meant to re-establish hierarchy, as though I had done something that surprised him, but he was generous enough to acknowledge it. "You've clearly done well for yourself." "I have," I said. "We should catch up properly," he said. "It's been too long. Your mother has missed you." He glanced at my mother, who nodded quickly like someone grateful to be included. "We all have." My sister was very quiet. She hadn't looked directly at me yet. I noticed that. "What brings you to this part of town?" I asked. My father smiled. It was a practiced smile, the one he used in rooms where he was trying to make an impression. "Actually, that's something we wanted to talk about. We were going to reach out. This is a coincidence, really, running into you here." He paused. Your uncle and I have been working on something. A business venture. We're looking for investment partners. There it was. I had run enough pitch meetings in my career to recognize the shape of one, the casual framing, the coincidence, the slow approach to the number. I looked at my mother. She was looking at her water glass. I looked at my sister. She finally met my eyes and I saw something in her expression that I couldn't quite name. Something close to apology, but not quite that. Something close to resignation. How much? I said. My father blinked. He had expected more runway. We're looking for 150, he said, to start. The property is already under contract, it just needs— No, I said. He stopped. I'm not going to invest in a venture with you, I said. Or with Uncle Raymond. I don't know why I used my uncle's name. It just came out. I'm not going to do that. My father's expression shifted. The practiced warmth didn't fall away all at once, it dimmed slowly, like a light being turned down on a dial. I understand this comes out of nowhere, he said, but I think if you heard the full picture. You took $11,000 from me when I was 23, I said. My voice was quieter than I expected it to be. You took it without telling me, without asking me. And when I called you about it, you told me I was being dramatic. 3 days later, I was sleeping on a couch. I didn't hear from you for 7 years. That is the full picture. No one at the table spoke. In the restaurant around us, someone laughed at another table. The soft jazz kept going. Someone's pasta arrived. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That was a difficult time for all of us, he said. It was such a specific kind of sentence, the passive grammar of it. A difficult time that appeared fully formed, without an agent, without anyone's hands on it, as though the difficulty had simply happened to the family equally, like weather. I'm sure it was, I said. Family doesn't just— He paused. Recalibrated again. You can't throw away 20 years because of one mistake. I didn't throw anything away, I said. I left because you made it clear there wasn't room. I'm the one who's been here. My sister made a small sound. When I looked at her, her jaw was tight, and her eyes were wet, and she was staring at the table. Her husband put his hand over hers. I looked at him. This stranger who had married into my family 7 years into my absence, who knew some version of me only through what he'd been told, who was sitting at this table because he loved my sister, and she had asked him to come. I don't know you, I said to him, quietly. I'd like to, sometime, if that's something you'd want. He looked surprised. He nodded once carefully. My father started to speak again. I turned back to him. I'm not going to invest, I said. That's final. I'm also going to ask you to be kinder to the staff here. They're doing their jobs. The lighting isn't oppressive, the restaurant is lovely, and the person who handles tenant relations is a professional who doesn't deserve whatever that conversation was when I walked in. My father stared at me. You can stay for lunch, I said. Or you can go. That's genuinely your choice, but I have a 1 o'clock. I stood up. I put the chair back where I'd taken it from, exactly as I'd found it. I went back upstairs. I sat at my desk for a while without opening my computer. My property manager knocked on the door frame. She's good at reading a room. And asked if I wanted coffee, and I said yes, and she brought it without asking questions, which was exactly what I needed. The group left 40 minutes later. I know because the restaurant manager texted me a heads up before they came back upstairs. They paid the bill. They tipped adequately, not generously. My sister texted me that evening. It was a short message. It said, I didn't know he was going to do that. I want you to know that. I've been trying to figure out how to reach you for 2 years. I'm sorry it happened this way. I read it probably 10 times. I didn't respond that night. I needed to think. Here's what I want to say to anyone who is in the middle of the years I was in the middle of, the years between the couch and the building. The years where no one in your family is calling and you are doing the work of becoming someone on your own, and some days that feels like freedom and some days it feels like the saddest thing in the world. It doesn't resolve cleanly. I want to tell you it does. I want to tell you there's a Tuesday where you walk into a room and everything clicks into place, and the person who hurt you sees exactly what they lost and the credits roll. That Tuesday happened to me, and I am telling you it did not feel the way I thought it would. What it felt like was tired and clear, and a little bit like setting something heavy down after carrying it so long you'd stop noticing the weight. My father wanted money. He will probably always want something. That part doesn't change. But my sister wanted me back, and that was something different. I texted her back the next morning. I said I wanted to get coffee, just the two of us. I said I had a lot of questions and I wasn't ready to promise what the answers would mean, but I wanted to ask them. She wrote back in about 40 seconds. She said yes. That was 3 months ago. We've had coffee 4 times. She's told me things about those 7 years that I'm still processing. I've told her things about mine. It's not simple, and it's not fast, and some of those coffees have ended with both of us crying in a parking garage, which is not exactly where I imagined this reconciliation happening. But I've learned that real things rarely happen where you imagine them. My father hasn't contacted me since March. I don't know if that will change. What I know is this: that building on the near north side has 12 tenants now. The restaurant on the ground floor has a 4.6 rating and a 6-week wait for weekend reservations. My firm is expanding into a 4th city next spring. And every Tuesday, I come in, I take the stairs to the 2nd floor, I make myself a coffee, and I sit down at my desk and I do the work. That's all it ever was. That's all it ever was. I used to think that what my father did to me was an isolated event, a bad decision made by a flawed man in a desperate moment. I spent a long time trying to file it that way, as an exception, as a mistake, as something that didn't reflect the whole of who he was. But here's what I've come to understand, slowly and not without resistance: the way a person treats you when they believe you have nothing is exactly who they are. The version of my father who took $11,000 from a 23-year-old and called her dramatic when she cried about it on a street corner. That wasn't a momentary lapse. That was a choice. And choices, repeated and unchallenged, become character. What I did in those 7 years wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I didn't build my firm to prove something to him. I didn't buy that building so I could one day look him in the eye and watch him recalculate. I built what I built because I had no one else, and I had to keep moving. And it turned out that keeping moving, consistently and honestly, compounds. That's not magic. That's just what integrity does over time when you stop waiting for someone else to hand you permission. The hardest part of that Tuesday, harder than seeing his face, harder than the ask, harder than the passive grammar of "that was a difficult time for all of us," was recognizing that I had spent years being angry at a person who was never going to be sorry. Not because he's incapable of feeling, but because acknowledging the full weight of what he did would require a kind of courage he has never chosen to develop. That's not a judgment. It's just an observation I had to make peace with. Intelligence without honesty is just clever manipulation. Resilience without reflection is just stubbornness. I've had to learn the difference, sometimes the hard way. The version of me who survived those first years after the couch was resilient, yes. But she was also scared and closed and convinced that needing people was the same as being vulnerable to them. It took a long time to understand that building something real requires letting some of that armor down, not with everyone, but with the right people. My sister texted me that evening and I read her message 10 times. What I felt wasn't triumph. What I felt was grief, actually. Grief for the years we lost, for the version of us that could have existed if things had been different, and then something quieter underneath the grief, which was the recognition that she had been trying to find her way back to me for 2 years, and that the capacity for that, to reach across a silence that long, to say "I'm sorry it happened this way" without making excuses, is its own kind of courage, and it deserved to be met. I am still learning when to hold the line and when to open the door. I don't think that lesson ever fully completes. But I know this: the people who show up with their hands out after years of silence are telling you something. And the people who show up with a quiet text and a shaking voice are telling you something entirely different. Wisdom is learning to know which is which.